Okay, so let's go ahead and build out Jerry. Jerry's going to be our AI help desk bot that's going to respond to associates there at the organization. Let's call it the Tesla organization. And basically, what Jerry's going to do is help out in Windows 10, Windows 11, VPN, and MFA issues raised by the user. Okay, and we cover the scope of this project and what we're going to do. So first things first, let's kind of map out what we're going to do. So we're going to build a PowerApp form, Canvas app, and then basically we're going to have a gallery that displays all the messages, right? So we want to get fancy. So the messages in red are going to be from the AI bot. The messages in blue are going to be from the current user. And if we can organize alternate these left and right, just kind of make it feel like SMS text messaging that you have like on iPhone or whatever, we want to simulate that. Then we will have a text box here. Kind of blow this up a little bit. So this is going to be the summary, right? So this is going to be our gallery. And then we're going to have this text box to where you would enter in the question or the issue. And then you will have a simple button. Once you hit submit, it kind of writes that back. Now, once you submit that as the user, basically what this needs to do is call Power Apps from Power Automate. And if you know me, I really hate this pattern, but this is the one use case to where it actually makes sense to call Power Automate from Power Apps. And the reason why I hate that is that one, this call from Power Apps to Power Automate, you kind of lock it in. Meaning that you tie this Power Automate to a Power App trigger, and you kind of limit its use cases to only being triggered by Power Apps. Whereas I love when an item is created by a SharePoint list, because you can come up with many different scenarios on how you add an item to a SharePoint list manually, Power Apps, mobile app, many different apps, so on and so forth, and still trigger and your downstream process remain the same. So that's neither here or there. But in this scenario, because we need to make a function, quote unquote, call and wait for the response, this makes perfect sense. So this Power App is going to call this Power Automate. So we're going to have our Power App trigger here, which is going to collect some information, and we have to define what parameters we expect Power Apps to pass. And then once it does that, it's going to call a HTTP request. That's going to call the chat, not chat, but the GPT 3.5 Turbo API. And then we're going to play around with some JSON here to kind of handle that request and make sure it's formatted, because that is a post request. So we have JSON that's going out to the endpoint, and then we got JSON that's being received to the endpoint, and we have to make sure that that's going to be looking the way we expect. And once we get that JSON back, we're going to pull out the message the way API respond, and then we need to shoot that back over to Power Apps. Okay, so that's what we wanted to create today. And if you get this piece down, that's really going to be the foundation on really adding artificial intelligence to any of your Power Platform solutions. And that's going to be key, because once you figure out a pattern on how do I take some information, format it into the JSON body that I need to post to ChatGPT, and then take the response back from ChatGPT and do something else with it, that's going to be the secret sauce, or what we call the moat of all your artificial intelligence solutions within the Power Platform. Yeah, it may vary. You probably move ChatGPT around, or you may have multiple agents working in your solution. But at the end of the day, that's going to be the common denominator. So we're going to spend some time with iterating through. We're not going to do it in this video, but in this series, we're going to spend some time iterating, getting a solid pattern together on how we handle that piece. All right, enough chat, enough for the whiteboard stuff. Let's go ahead and get started. So here I am in Power Apps. I'm going to click on Canvas, and we want this to be a tablet. So let's just call this the Jerry AI Help Desk bot. All right, so Jerry the AI Help Desk, and Jerry's going to take on a personality and persona of its own. So let's just see how this pans out. Now I'm going to be very loose with my Power Apps, right? Because really all I really want to do, and I'm sorry, this is my OCD kicking in. All I really want to do is to get this thing to start to send and receive information from Power Automate, and then in Power Automate we're going to pepper in our chat or GPT API, right? So to do that, let's just kind of bring on the screen. Let's do a vertical gallery. Let's make this blank because I don't want to deal with positioning and errors and all this other stuff because it's assuming certain things, right? So let's just drop that blank blank gallery on the screen for now. And then once we have that, we're going to pretty this up later. Now we need to add in a text input, and this is for the user to put in the issue that they're having. Just put that in now. I do want to put a border around this gallery just so I can see it, and then kind of get a sense of how wide things are and stuff like that. So go ahead and drop this on there. And then the last thing I want to drop on here is a button, and that's going to handle our submit to Power Automate. Perfect. So we got a button on here. And again, we're going to pretty this up here later in the video, but for right now, this is all we need. And now what I want to do is to go ahead and put some developer-friendly names on these. So let's just call this text input. And then this one be our submit button. And then this would be our history, right? Chat history. All right, and that's all we need. And what we're going to do with this gallery, let's grow into this because we have to build a collection and all this other fun stuff. But let's grow into that. All right, let's shorten this gallery up a little bit, and let's give it our text box a little bit more headway. And then we want to change the alignment on this. One, you want to change the mode to make sure it's multi-line, and then that way they can type in a nice description of the issue that they're having. Okay. All right. So next thing we need to do is go ahead and click on. Can you guys see this? Okay. Just want to zoom in. I want to make sure you can see it. Okay. All right. Click on this little Power Automate button here, and this is going to allow us to create a new flow. Now this is tricky. It could be my tenant, right? My playground tenant that I'm having, but to find the right trigger, I had to play around with this a little bit. So let's just see how far we can get with this. So it wants me to create a template. I'm going to actually create this from blank. Yeah, and then this is the issue that I had, right? So it creates this flow. It's untitled. Let's go ahead and give this a title. Let's just say get AI response. And we can get, this is very generic for what we're using. So, we can give this a more meaningful name later. But for right now, this is going to be fine. And notice that I'm doing the function naming convention here, like get, set, so on and so forth, like treating this like it's a function. And let's just compose this, right? Let's just compose. And basically what I want to do is drop any information that I receive back into this compose. And what I don't see is the ability to create parameters. And this is the issue I ran into. So let me just go ahead and save this. That's why I dropped that compose in there. So I have a trigger and I have at least one action, which is the minimum required to save any Power Automate, just to kind of get this thing saving. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually pop open Power Automate in a separate window, hit refresh. Let's make sure that the one that we just created appears. And I'm going to have to delete that trigger and recreate it just so that I can define the parameters that I want, right? So if I click on the edit option here, and again, this could just be my tenant, but when, because I don't use this pattern a lot, calling Power Automate from Power Apps. And I thought it was weird. I was like, wasn't I supposed to be able to define like the parameters and stuff? Okay, so what we want to do, let's go ahead and delete this guy. And this is going to throw all kind of red flags. And now click on the Power Apps action. And then let's just use V2 as our trigger. And this is the piece I was missing. So from here, let's just go ahead and do text. And let's just call this the message. Right? And we probably want to grab an email address from the user. And we'll use this email address as their primary key. So from Power Apps, they're going to pass in the message that they want chat to evaluate, and then they're going to send the email address of the current user. And we're going to use that because, again, as I mentioned before, we want to save all the chat history per user. And later in the series, I'll show you how to do that using SharePoint lists. Okay, so now that we have this, the last thing we want to do is respond back. So we want to send a response. So let's just do Power Apps. And so if I click on this, we should be a respond to Power Apps. Here we go. So this is going to be a response that we send back. And then we're going to make that a text value. And then we're going to say chat response. Right? Okay. So in its simplest form, we should be good to go. Oh, it wiped out. Oh, because I deleted that trigger. It wiped out what I had. So I want to save this anyway. So I want to make sure that the message that we receive is this. We also want to ensure that if they're passing the email, we get the current user's email. All right. And then for the response, we can put in the message and then say something like, so I got this from, all right, something simple like that. All right, really just to kind of set up the foundation, let's just save this, make sure we don't have any errors. All right, so this looks good. Let's go back into Power Apps. Let's refresh this because we did add parameters, and so if you change the signature, right, the parameters that you pass into it, or the information or the signature that the response, then you want to refresh this so that way Power Apps is updated with the changes, the latest and greatest changes that we did in Power Automate, right? All right, so now to keep this simple, let's just drop in a label into this. And we don't have a collection yet. So there's another thing. So let's build our collection. So to build a collection, this is what I love to do. So on Start, which is like my paging net for all of my developers out here, this is going to be the one script of code or the one series of code that I like to call at the very beginning when Power Apps is open. And this on Start only runs once when the Power App is initially open. So let's just do a clear. And let's just make up a collection. Let's just call this history. And it's yelling at me because I haven't set a value. There's nothing that's setting that. So you're clearing a collection that's not yet even set. So let's go to the button here, or submit. And basically what we're going to do is collect. In that collect history, I had to paste that in. And I'm going to do something like email is going to be the current user's email. And I'm defining all of these properties, right, in this collection. Like I'm making this up along the way. So email is going to be the current user's email. And then I'm going to have another property called message. And for now, when they submit something, that's going to be my input.text, right? And that's all it's going to do. It's going to keep collecting those. And then I'm going to get a response. So I'm going to do another collect of the response. And to get a response and calling that Power Automate, is going to be the name of that Power Automate. So that get AI response. And then the parameters that I told it to expect, right? And as you can see here, the one is the message and then the email. So it's going to be that text input message again. And then the current user's email again. Right? And it's going to be the response back from ChatGPT, which is going to be stored inside this chat response property. Right? So now, instead of calling this email, I'm going to call this user. And this is why. Because the user for the person that responded for chat is going to be, let's just call it AI for now. Actually, sorry, this should be user, and really I'm giving it a fake personality. I'll explain what I mean by this in a second, right? So that's going to be, let's just close bracket this and then close the parenthesis. Okay, so basically this is what I'm doing. In the chat, in that collection, I'm trying to build out two records. A user record, I'm sorry, a record with identified by two different properties. So one record is going to be user, which is going to be the current user, and then their message, right? So that's going to be that piece right there. So let me stretch this out. And then once you have that, okay, that's not fair. Then AI is going to respond back, or the GPT API is going to respond back with its message. And to uniquely identify that, its user property will be set to AI. And this is for lack of creativity, right? So, and really that's what I'm trying to do is build a collection. So once the current user sends their problem, I'm going to capture that, give them a user type user, set their user property to user, and then whatever the AI responds back with, I'm going to make sure I flag that as user property AI, and then whatever message that they pass back. And that's going to be key because now I can toggle, and in the chat history or in the gallery, I can toggle these two to give them different treatment, right? So if user equals AI, align left. If user equals user, align right, right? So we can do things like that. But for right now, we just want to collect and make sure that we're getting the response. So let's just go ahead and save this. Run this in preview mode. Oh, I was wondering, I was like, how am I getting that lorem ipsum? That's an indicator that you have not set the items property. And this should be collection history. All right. So let me go ahead and run this, prime everything up, run on start. Everything's primed. Default text should be 0 or empty string. And hint text or placeholder text should be enter your description or message here. All right, so here, hit submit. From Clark 365. Oh, but I didn't get the message. Interesting. Okay, so let's look at our Power Automate. I got this from message. Okay, maybe this is not wide enough to show everything. So let's widen our template because I'm going to say this is throwing me for a loop here. There we go. That's the whole message. So if I stretch this out, and then you can mess around with auto heights and all this other good stuff so that way you're only using the real estate needed based on the message size, and we can grow into that. Again, what I really want to do is to kind of get this wired up and get Chat GPT responding to this. Okay, so this is working as expected. I'm sending the message, I'm capturing the message sent, and then I'm capturing the response received, right? So now, and you don't want this hello thing just hanging out there. So the only other thing I will add to this before we kind of jump into the Power Automate stuff is clear out the text box. Right, so you clear that out and get that thing ready for them to enter in another message. Okay, now let's focus our work here. Okay, so to really understand what we need to build out, the first thing we probably want to do is take a look at the GPT API and see exactly what all we need to call and the expected response we should expect. So with GPT 3.5 Turbo, what we're going to, and you have all these different OpenAI endpoint or options, right? The one that we want to focus on is the chat completion option. And here you have many different code samples here. The one that I use that's closer to an HTTP request within Power Automate would be the curl sample code. And basically, it shows you like this is a header. I don't know the syntax right, but I understand REST API, and I understand that the data switch, I assume that's what that is. This is the JSON payload that we'll be posting to. This is the endpoint that we need to call. These are the headers that are needed, and our OpenAI API key is going to be part of that header under the authorization header type. So if I just start copying and pasting certain key pieces of this code and start to create this in Power Automate, this is what that would look like. So let me go ahead and position a HTTP request, right? Because we need to call the API, and that's going to be this action here. And of course, this is going to be premium, which is why I do not like calling these Power Automates from Power Apps, because when you call a premium Power Automate from Power Apps, every user of your application must have a premium license. If there are patterns that are being used to where you can create like a singleton pattern to where you can encapsulate or wrap that premium connector and kind of keep it contained within a handful of service accounts. But that's beyond the scope of this video. But that's one of the reasons why I say I do not like triggering Power Automate from Power Apps. But I will show you some other things to consider to where this solution would not be that expensive. But anyway, so let's go to method. This is going to be a GET request, a post request, and then in our headers we're going to use content type here, and we just drop that into this key, and then the other header is going to be authorization, and we drop that into this key, and then the content type value is going to be application JSON. Let's go ahead and paste that in. And then for authorization, here's the key. You want to start with the keyword bear and the space, right? And then do your off key here. So basically what I'm gonna do, and I'm just confirming I don't have any leading spaces or extra spaces. So behind the last R in bearer, you're gonna have a space. And then instead of pasting here, you could explicitly paste in your API key. I think that's the fact that you have an API key in here is probably not a good thing. But to make it not a horrible thing, I'm gonna just store it into a variable and then use that variable to in the post request, right? So let's just do this. This is gonna be a string, and then call it var OpenAI API. Okay, and then I will paste that in. So one of the things that you probably have to do is go into your OpenAI profile, generate an API key. So let me go ahead and do that real quick. Okay, so basically what I'm doing is you go into once you log in, again, go to platform.openai.com, then go to your profile picture, view API keys, and for this demonstration, I'm going to, it's asking for a name. This is new. Okay, so let's just call this the, go ahead and paste this into the variable. And now, once I'm in my request, I can just use that variable in that place, right? No spaces, no special characters, or anything like that. Okay. Now that that's piece done, the next piece you want to do is go to the sample code and look at the parameters here. And basically the way that this works is that if you look at the role property, it accepts one of three. The system is where you give it its personality. The user is the message that comes from the current user. And then the assistant would be how it responds. So that's going to be its response. When we get into the chat history, this is going to be critical, right? For right now, and this is an array. This is an array of objects, right? And it's really very similar to our item or object that we use in Power Apps, where instead of using user as the property, I use role. They use role, I use user. The type is that, and then the content, I use message, they use content, and then the value of the content, the actual message will be that. So how do we piece this together? So the first thing we have to do is make sure that our model is in place within this object. So basically, let's do this. So let's just copy this whole piece, because the thing about this when I'm learning is that you want to kind of build this up in blocks and test along the way to make sure that everything's working as expected. So we have let's just do this. Hello, Jerry. We have our content type authorization. We have sample with hard-coded text, and we're not passing cookies, and authentication is actually set to none, which threw me off a little bit because we use an authorization header, so we don't have any implied authentication here. So once we save this, we should actually get a response. So let's go ahead and test this out. And let's just run this as actually, you know what? I'm not going to use test. I'm going to test this out using Power Apps. So let me go here, put this in play mode. I didn't change the definition, so this should work as expected. And let's just do something like, hello, Jerry. Again, this is not going to get passed to the chatbot because we're not passing any parameters in the API request, right? We have everything hard-coded. All right, so this is what I expect. This is the hard-coded text. But if I go into Power Automate, let's just open the history in a new tab. Go to the flow. Look at the run history for that Power Automate, right? So we should look at the run history, the one that was 31 seconds ago. This is our guy. And I'm expecting, as long as, and that's the other thing, we got a green check here. So that means that this API call was successful. So now if I look at this and keep scrolling here, the response was, hello, how may I assist you? So that means that we're wired up and we're communicating successfully to the chatbot using the GPT 3.5 model. So what I'm doing, I'm copying all of this JSON that was sent back, because now what I'm going to do is once I go into edit, I can scroll down and create a JSON object off of that sample JSON. So here I just go and find my JSON action, and it's going to allow me to create a schema, and that way I get token friendly variables to use. So what I'm going to pass in is the response back from the HTTP, which is going to be in the body, and then the schema I'm going to generate from sample, which is why I copy that sample JSON. And this is going to give me way more than what I need, right? So I'm going to click done here, and now it's going to generate that JSON. And now in the response, instead of doing this jazz, I can now pull out the actual response back. Now, again, I got way more than I need. I have role model and all this other good stuff. What I'm looking for is the content variable. So here, let me just select content. Oh, this is an array, isn't it? Okay, hold on. We got to do a little bit more work. Okay, so what this action is saying is that, hey, you're selecting a variable that's in an array, meaning that it could be one or more responses back. In our case, it's only going to be one, but from a system perspective, we have to treat it as if it's a collection. So what I want to do, and I do this a lot with dealing with actions. When you do the approval action in Power Automate and you click on you want to read back the response, and that's actually wrapped inside of an array. So instead of having it do an apply each to my like send email, I store all of that apply each. I keep that apply each contained to a single variable. So let's do this. So let's create another variable, and we'll just call this the API response, right? So API response, let's just go ahead and name, and this is one of the things I always do. So just forgive me if this seems like a little overhead, just naming like these actions and all this other good stuff. All right, so API response. So basically what I'm gonna do now, so once we get that parse JSON, I'm gonna set that variable. So just say set variable here. And we want to set the API response, and we come inside of here, and that's going to be stored in the content property. And as soon as I select that, it runs that apply each. Again, this is only one record, but future versions of that, they may change that JSON to have multiple responses back, but that's something we would grow into. So for right now, that API response is going to be what we send back, single variable, single action. So now if I click save, everyone should be happy. Let me get out of here. Sometimes you get those error messages and they just don't go away, and you keep thinking you have an error and you spin your wheels just knowing that it's just a message that never disappeared, even though it's not an issue. Okay, so now I can, so here's another thing. Let's make this dynamic. So we still hard coded. We're not exactly where we want to be. But if I do this HTTP response, so right here under this content property is where I want to pass in. This is where I want to pass in the actual input from Power Automate. So here I'm gonna just select this message variable, and I don't know if I need to wrap this in quotes or not. I don't think I do, because I think the fact that it's a string stored in a variable, it would be smart enough to wrap those in quotes before that post request will be smart enough to wrap that string in quotes before sending it to the endpoint. So let's just test that out. Okay, so now we go into Power Apps, go into play mode. So here we just want to say something like, hello, how are you? And the chatbot should respond back. So go click submit. That's fantastic. So that's a real response, right? Click that submit. All right, perfect. Okay, so now this thing is chatting away. We got this thing wired up. It's sending information out. And the last thing we want to do for this particular video before we clean things up in the next video is that we want to give it a persona. So we don't want it to just be responding with any old thing, talking about history or finances, or kind of take the conversation way beyond the purpose of it for this solution. We want to keep it defined within a certain scope. So to do that, I've already played around with the prompt, and I will share that here in a second. Okay, so this prompt is going to be very light at the start, and this is going to be the one thing that we will continuously refine based on testing and see how this thing is responding. But basically what I've done was gave it a very simple identity. The first line in the prompt would be, you are a system engineer for a help desk, and your role is to support users with their issues, support users with issues with Windows 10, Windows 11, VPN using AnyConnect, and MFA using Microsoft 365 Business Edition. Okay, so, and I think this is enough for us to get started and to be dangerous, right? So now we can go ahead and say this in a variable. Right, so I'm gonna just call this a AI prompt, and I'm gonna paste that information there. And again, just rename this to var AI prompt. And now that I have that, I can go to this HTTP request, and you notice how you have the different roles. So we kind of have to break this out. So that's going to be your record. Let me just zoom in so you can see it. So the role on this one is going to be system, and I know that because of the API documentation, right? And then they all have a content property, and then within that content, again, this is where, actually, let me close this curly bracket and begin, and don't forget the comma. And so really for the content for the system is going to be that prompt, right? And this is why I love using variables for this, because we're going to be constantly updating this, and you don't want to be making copy updates or text updates in this environment and forget the semicolon or fat finger something and miss a double quotes or something like that, and you be spinning your wheels because you want to make a simple text change and now your solution stops working. So let's just save this, and now let's go back to Power Apps. Let's go into play mode. I guess we should have a clear button. So let's create another button. Let's just call this clear. So I'm gonna copy this. And usually with these buttons, I don't get too crazy with them. I respect and understand like the primary color and secondary color or non-primary color, and basically to achieve that I just do the inverse of the colors. So if I'm using this blue, I'll use that for text. That's not the blue, is it? Because this should be empty if it was the right blue. It's one of these blues. There we go. So I use that blue. So I do the inverse. So I use whatever I'm using the fill for one, I use for the text for the other, and then the text in the border for the other. You know, I just kind of flip-flop the fields in the border. All right, so let's, we're not going to use that. We're going to use this blue. So I use the border and the text the same color, and then the field, the text color of the other one, right? And usually, you know, with that combination, you get something that's pretty decent. All right, so for clear, we want to clear out the collection, right? So on select, we do want to reset, and history, we just want to clear that out. So let's erase everything up to here, and then just type clear. All right, so now if I do it in play mode, if I clear this, we should be good to go. All right, so hello. I am having issues with my display monitor. And click submit. And once we treat this, oh, this is interesting. Did we change the signature? No, we did not. Okay, so I guess you have to refresh this every time you change the Power App, the Power Automate. All right. Unless this, see, I thought you only had to refresh it if you change the signature. All right, so let's try this. Nope. I feel like we didn't save this then. It says save. Okay. Let's see, what are we doing with the response? So the chat response is the API response. Okay, I don't know why this is not giving me the latest and greatest. So let me clear this and play again. I don't want to refresh that. And hit submit. Okay. let's see how fancy it is with its troubleshooting skills. So it should ask me like something along the lines, what type of mouse are you using? Is it hardwired? Is it Bluetooth? Or what? Let's see what it says. There could be a few different reasons why your mouse is not moving. Check the mouse is probably connected to the computer. And then and now it kind of get broken up, right? So this, my friends, is fantastic. Okay. So now we have frontline of defense, help desk solution, help desk troubleshooting, using ChatGPT, the intelligence, the artificial intelligence from this large language model that we did not have to have a PhD to create, but through the power of open source APIs and the power of the Power Platform to handle the infrastructure for us, we're able to create very smart applications within the Power Platform. And that's the whole purpose of this series, to really say, yeah, using the chat bot and the chat assist to help create Power Automate and to help create Power Apps is cute, but to move the needle with the business value, to move the needle with productivity, to offload some of this work for those of us who are exhausted and overworked, underpaid. This is the true power of this technology. And at the end of this series, you will have something to be very proud of. I'll see you tomorrow.